Welcome, my friend. Yes, it's me. I am the Arabic language, your witty, centuries-old host for today's explainer. Look, I've survived the rise and fall of massive empires, I've carried the sweeping poetry of the desert sands, and, honestly, I have barely survived the absolute chaos of modern text messaging. I mean, do you know how much it hurts a majestic classical language to see its beautiful flowing script reduced to random numbers? Using a 3 for the mighty Ain or a 7 for the breathy Ha just because it's easier to type? Wow, it's a literal insult to my antiquity. But hey, we endure, right? Today, we're going on a little journey through my very soul, my grammar. We are going to look at the intricate rules that hold my entire universe together and, spoiler alert, how native speakers today completely ignore those rules in the name of convenience. Let's get into it.
So tell me this, can a simple little stroke above or below a letter actually alter your entire belief system? Now, you might be thinking, come on, a vowel is just a passing sound, it's just a minor detail. No way, my friend. In my world, changing one tiny haraka, a single vowel mark, can completely alter the meaning of a sacred Quranic verse. If you mispronounce a single vowel at the end of a word, you literally change the actor into the one being acted upon. Suddenly, you've completely shifted who's doing the testing and who's being tested. You've rewritten history. It is quite literally a matter of linguistic and sometimes theological life and death. So let me show you how to survive this grammatical minefield. I want you to think of my words like actors on a grand stage, okay? They physically change their clothes depending on their exact role in the sentence. When a word wears a dama, that little rounded oo sound at the end, it wears it like a heavy golden crown. That word is the boss. It is the one actively doing the action. But if it wears a fatha, the flat ass sound, well, now it has a massive target on its back. It's the object. It's the one getting acted upon. Imagine the pure chaos of reading an ancient manuscript and mixing up who is hitting and who is getting hit, or who is granting mercy and who is receiving it, all because someone carelessly swapped their grammatical hats. That, right there, is the sheer, terrifying power of the vowel. Okay, let's dive into Section 1, The Secret of Harakat and I'rab, the grammar wardrobe. This grammar wardrobe is absolutely crucial. It's the foundation of classical Arabic. Let's look at the word for house. We have baitin, baitin, and baitin. These represent the nominative, accusative, and genitive cases. When the house is the subject of your sentence, doing something important, it proudly wears that unsound. When you enter the house, making it the direct object of your action, it totally changes its outfit to N. And if you're just simply sitting inside the house, it puts on the in sound. It is a brilliant, elegant, and perfectly systematic wardrobe change. And because of this, you don't have to lock words into a rigid, boring order like you do in English. My words can dance around the sentence completely freely, and you will always know exactly who is doing what just by listening to what they're wearing. How cool is that? Moving right along to Section 2, the magic of the dual, the power of two. Let's see how this all builds into something truly magical, a feature you rarely see in other languages. Look, in most languages, you have singular for one item and plural for many. You just lump couples in with massive crowds. Not me. Oh no. I have a VIP lounge, an exclusive grammatical club reserved entirely for the number 2. If there are exactly 2 of something, they get their very own special treatment, completely distinct from 3, 4, or 1,000. It's a level of precision that elevates a simple conversation into something deeply, profoundly poetic. Take a look at this. The word for 2 teachers. Mudarisani. Not 1, not 3. Exactly 2. Notice the elegant standard rule we're applying here. We take the singular word, mudaris, and we simply attach the ani suffix. In English, you have to waste their breath saying the actual number 2, and then awkwardly tack an S onto the end of the noun. I just seamlessly blend it into one incredibly smooth utterance. Mudarisani. It sounds musical, doesn't it? It's got rhythm, it's got unyielding grace. It is literally the absolute pinnacle of classical grammar, perfectly built for scholars, philosophers, and poets. Which brings us to Section 3, Formal versus Street Language, the Great Butchering. But alas, perfection cannot last in the hands of mortals. Okay, lean in, because I'm about to spill a scandalous secret about modern spoken language. Are you ready? You will almost never hear a native speaker using that elegant aleph sound for the dual in daily conversation today. No way.
Modern Arabs walking the bustling streets of Cairo, Amman, or Riyadh, they completely butcher my beautiful ancient rules just to order their street food a little bit faster. I mean, it is a modern linguistic tragedy of epic proportions. Let me show you what I mean. Formal Arabic demands kitabaini for 2 books, a majestic, beautifully self-contained word. But what does spoken street Arabic do? They lazily slap the number 2, its nain, right in front of the singular noun. It's nain kitab, literally 2 book. Oh, it just breaks my ancient heart to hear it spoken aloud. Or they'll use a plural ending replacing the graceful ani with a flat een. They enthusiastically trade centuries of grammatical poetry for pure lazy convenience, all because pronouncing the proper dual takes what? A fraction of a second longer? Unbelievable.
And trust me, the absolute tragedy continues with plurals. Classical Arabic has 2 sound masculine plural endings, the grand, sweeping oon for the subjects, the ones actively in charge, and the een for the passive objects. But out on the street, they drop the oon completely. It is just a permanent, never-ending een sound, everywhere forever. They say mohandisin for engineers, whether those engineers are brilliantly designing a magnificent bridge or disastrously falling off of it. The grammatical function is entirely ignored. All those gorgeous nuances are totally stripped away just for the sake of an easier, softer sound. All right, let's snap back to classical grammar in section 4, the mystery of plurals and gender, the non-human rule.
Back to where order and logic reign supreme. Now, the rule of non-human plurals is something that consistently breaks the minds of new learners, but I assure you, it is pure genius. Arabic grammar draws a hard, philosophical line between humans and non-humans. If you have a plural of humans, say wise men or skilled nurses, you use plural adjectives. Makes sense, right? But if you have a plural of non-human objects, like a towering stack of books, or a fleet of cars, or a range of majestic mountains, we treat that entire group as a single, feminine entity. Yes, you heard me correctly. If you want to say the new books, you literally say the books, she is new. It's quirky, absolutely, but it brilliantly forces you to categorize the world in a very specific way. It bundles the inanimate, physical world into a collective, singular feminine essence.
And finally, section 5, keys to understanding the Quran, the miracle unlocked.
So you might be asking yourself, why does all this strict grammar even matter? Why suffer through the intense rules of the nominative cases, the duals, and the constantly shifting vowels? Because, my friend, they are the ultimate keys to understanding the Quran. This is where the true miracle is unlocked. Take the rule of the mudaf, the possessive phrase. When a dual or plural noun possesses something, that final noon sound we talked about earlier in words like mudarrisani, it is completely dropped. And this isn't just a random grammatical quirk, it's a divine precision instrument. By dropping that exact letter, the words fuse together. The possessor and the possessed become seamlessly linked in sound and meaning. These intricate disappearing letters and shifting vowels are the exact keys you need to decode the majestic, divine linguistics of the Quranic text, where absolutely not a single syllable is wasted. And the pronouns align perfectly with this divine order. We have huma, specifically for they too. We have antuma, specifically for you too. And then there's nahnu, meaning we. Notice the profound, overarching humility in how nahnu is used here. It humbly covers both a simple pair of people and a massive, sprawling crowd. Whether it's 2 believers quietly whispering a prayer together in the middle of the night, or 2 million souls gathered in massive congregation during Hajj, nahnu unites them all under one simple, shared word. The bond of us remains exactly the same whether you are few or overwhelmingly many. Which leaves us with a rather profound mystery to ponder. Think about this. If huma exclusively means they too, why does the text specifically use this dual form when speaking of the heavens and the earth together? Are they a cosmic couple? 2 halves of a single grand reality bound in perpetual harmonious motion? I'm going to leave you with that cosmic puzzle to chew on, my friend. The rules of Arabic aren't just mere grammar. They are the profound lenses through which you see the universe. Respect my vowels, study my texts, and I will see you next time on The Explainer.